will always be somebody, but they will no longer be the first couple of the land. So far, however, Peter, I think they're handling it pretty well.
Okay, Sam Donaldson at the White House. We'll talk to you after the president speaks. The president will say goodbye tonight from the Oval Office. He says he wants it to be a personal speech.
My fellow Americans, this is the 34th time I'll speak to you from the Oval Office, and the last. We've been together 8 years now, and soon it'll be time for me to go. But before I do, I wanted to share some thoughts, some of which I've been saving for a long time. It's been the honor of my life to be your president. So many of you have written the past few weeks to say thanks, but I could say as much to you. Nancy and I are grateful for the opportunity you gave us to serve. One of the things about the presidency is that you're always somewhat apart. You spend a lot of time going by too fast in a car someone else is driving and seeing the people through tinted glass, the parents holding up a child and the wave you saw too late and couldn't return. And so many times I wanted to stop and reach out from behind the glass and connect. Well, maybe I can do a little of that tonight. People ask how I feel about leaving, and the fact is, parting is such sweet sorrow. The sweet part is California and the ranch and freedom. The sorrow, the goodbyes, of course, and leaving this beautiful place. You know, down the hall and up the stairs from this office is the part of the White House where the president and his family live. There are a few favorite windows I have up there that I like to stand and look out of early in the morning. The view is over the grounds here to the Washington Monument, and then the Mall, and the Jefferson Memorial. But on mornings when the humidity is low, you can see past the Jefferson to the river, the Potomac, and the Virginia shore. Someone said that's the view Lincoln had when he saw the smoke rising from the Battle of Bull Run. But I see more prosaic things. The grass on the banks, the morning traffic as people make their way to work, now and then a sailboat on the river. I've been thinking a bit at that window. I've been reflecting on what the past 8 years have meant and mean. And the image that comes to mind like a refrain is a nautical one. A small story about a big ship and a refugee and a sailor. It was back in the early 80s, at the height of the boat people, and the sailor was hard at work on the carrier Midway, which was patrolling the South China Sea. The sailor, like most American servicemen, was young, smart, and fiercely observant. The crew spied on the horizon a leaky little boat, and crammed inside were refugees from Indochina hoping to get to America. The Midway sent a small launch to bring them to the ship in safety. As the refugees made their way through the choppy seas, one spied the sailor on deck and stood up and called out to him. He yelled, "Hello, American sailor. Hello, freedom man." A small moment with a big meaning. A moment the sailor who wrote it in a letter couldn't get out of his mind. And when I saw it, neither could I. Because that's what it was to be an American in the 1980s. We stood again for freedom. I know we always have, but in the past few years, the world, again, and in a way we ourselves, rediscovered it. It's been quite a journey this decade, and we held together through some stormy seas. And at the end, together, we're reaching our destination. The fact is, from Grenada to the Washington and Moscow summits, from the recession of 81 to 82, to the expansion that began in late 82 and continues to this day, we've made a difference. The way I see it, there were two great triumphs, two things that I'm proudest of. One is the economic recovery, in which the people of America created and filled 19 million new jobs. The other is the recovery of our morale. America is respected again in the world and looked to for leadership. Something that happened to me a few years ago reflects some of this. It was back in 1981, and I was attending my first big economic summit, which was held that year in Canada. The meeting place rotates among the member countries. The opening meeting was a formal dinner for the heads of government of the 7 industrialized nations. Well, I sat there like the new kid in school and listened. And it was all Francois this and Helmut that. They dropped titles and spoke to one another on a first-name basis. Well, at one point, I sort of leaned in and said, "My name's Ron." But in that same year, we began the actions we felt would ignite an economic comeback. cut taxes and regulation, started to cut spending, and soon the recovery began. 2 years later, another economic summit with pretty much the same cast. At the big opening meeting, we all got together, and all of a sudden, and just for a moment, I saw that everyone was just sitting there looking at me. And then one of them broke the silence. "Tell us about the American miracle," he said. Well, back in 1980, when I was running for president, it was all so different. Some pundits said our programs would result in catastrophe. Our views on foreign affairs would cause war. Our plans for the economy would cause inflation to soar and bring about economic collapse. I even remember one highly respected economist saying back in 1982 that the engines of economic growth have shut down here, and they're likely to stay that way for years to come. Well, he and the other opinion leaders were wrong. The fact is, what they called radical was really right. What they called dangerous was just desperately needed. And in all of that time, I won a nickname, the Great Communicator. But I never thought it was my style or the words I used that made a difference. It was the content. I wasn't a great communicator, but I communicated great things. And they didn't spring full bloom from my brow. They came from the heart of a great nation, from our experience, our wisdom, and our belief in the principles that have guided us for 2 centuries. They called it the Regan Revolution. Well, I'll accept that. But for me, it always seemed more like the great rediscovery, a rediscovery of our values and our common sense. Common sense told us that when you put a big tax on something, the people will produce less of it. So we cut the people's tax rates, and the people produced more than ever before. The economy bloomed like a plant that had been cut back and could now grow quicker and stronger. Our economic program brought about the longest peacetime expansion in our history. Real family income up, the poverty rate down, entrepreneurship booming, and an explosion in research and new technology. We're exporting more now than ever because American industry became more competitive. And at the same time, we summoned the national will to knock down protectionist walls abroad instead of erecting them at home. Common sense also told us that to preserve the peace, we'd have to become strong again after years of weakness and confusion. So we rebuilt our defenses. And this new year, we toasted the new peacefulness around the globe. Not only have the superpowers actually begun to reduce their stockpiles of nuclear weapons, and hope for even more progress is bright, but the regional conflicts that rack the globe are also beginning to cease. The Persian Gulf is no longer a war zone. The Soviets are leaving Afghanistan. The Vietnamese are preparing to pull out of Cambodia. And an American-mediated accord will soon send 50,000 Cuban troops home from Angola. The lesson of all this was, of course, that because we're a great nation, our challenges seem complex. It will always be this way. But as long as we remember our first principles and believe in ourselves, the future will always be ours. And something else we learned. Once you begin a great movement, there's no telling where it'll end. We meant to change a nation, and instead, we changed a world. Countries across the globe are turning to free markets and free speech, and turning away from the ideologies of the past. For them, the great rediscovery of the 1980s has been that, lo and behold, the moral way of government is the practical way of government. Democracy, the profoundly good, is also the profoundly productive. When you've got to the point where you can celebrate the anniversaries of your 39th birthday, you can sit back sometimes, review your life, and see it flowing before you. For me, there was a fork in the river, and it was right in the middle of my life. I never meant to go into politics. It wasn't my intention when I was young. But I was raised to believe you had to pay your way for the blessings bestowed on you. I was happy with my career in the entertainment world, but I ultimately went into politics because I wanted to protect something precious. Ours was the first revolution in the history of mankind that truly reversed the course of government, and with 3 little words: we, the people. We, the people, tell the government what to do. It doesn't tell us. We, the people, are the driver. The government is the car. And we decide where it should go and by what route and how fast. Almost all the world's constitutions are documents in which governments tell the people what their privileges are. Our Constitution is a document in which we, the people, tell the government what it is allowed to do. We, the people, are free. This belief has been the underlying basis for everything I've tried to do these past 8 years. But back in the 1960s, when I began, it seemed to me that we'd begun reversing the order of things. That through more and more rules and regulations and confiscatory taxes, the government was taking more of our money, more of our options, and more of our freedom. I went into politics in part to put up my hand and say, stop. I was a citizen politician, and it seemed the right thing for a citizen to do. I think we have stopped a lot of what needed stopping. And I hope we have once again reminded people that man is not free unless government is limited. There's a clear cause and effect here that is as neat and predictable as a law of physics. As government expands, liberty contracts. Nothing is less free than pure communism, and yet we have the past few years forged a satisfying new closeness with the Soviet Union. I've been asked if this isn't a gamble, and my answer is no, because we're basing our actions not on words, but deeds. The détente of the 1970s was based not on actions, but promises. They'd promised to treat their own people and the people of the world better, but the Gulag was still the Gulag, and the state was still expansionist, and they still waged proxy wars in Africa, Asia, and Latin America. Well, this time, so far, it's different. President Gorbachev has brought about some internal democratic reforms and begun the withdrawal from Afghanistan. He has also freed prisoners whose names I've given him every time we've met. But life has a way of reminding you of big things through small incidents. Once during the heady days of the Moscow summit, Nancy and I decided to break off from the entourage one afternoon to visit the shops on Arbat Street. That's a little street just off Moscow's main shopping area. Even though our visit was a surprise, every Russian there immediately recognized us and called out our names and reached for our hands. We were just about swept away by the warmth. You could almost feel the possibilities in all that joy. But within seconds, a KGB detail pushed their way toward us and began pushing and shoving the people in the crowd. It was an interesting moment. It reminded me that while the man on the street in the Soviet Union yearns for peace, the government is communist, and those who run it are communists. And that means we and they view such issues as freedom and human rights very differently. We must keep up our guard, but we must also continue to work together to lessen and eliminate tension and mistrust. My view is that President Gorbachev is different from previous Soviet leaders. I think he knows some of the things wrong with his society and is trying to fix them. We wish him well, and we'll continue to work to make sure that the Soviet Union that eventually emerges from this process is a less threatening one. What it all boils down to is this. I want the new closeness to continue, and it will, as long as we make it clear that we will continue to act in a certain way as long as they continue to act in a helpful manner. If and when they don't, at first pull your punches. If they persist, pull the plug. It's still trust, but verify. It's still play, but cut the cards. It's still watch closely, and don't be afraid to see what you see. I've been asked if I have any regrets. Well, I do. The deficit is one. I've been talking a great deal about that lately, but tonight isn't for arguments, and I'm going to hold my tongue. But an observation, I've had my share of victories in the Congress, but what few people noticed is that I never won anything you didn't win for me. They never saw my troops. They never saw Reagan's regiments, the American people. You won every battle with every call you made and letter you wrote demanding action. Well, action is still needed. If we're to finish the job, Reagan's regiments will have to become the Bush brigades. Soon he'll be the chief, and he'll need you every bit as much as I did. Finally, there is a great tradition of warnings in presidential farewells, and I've got one that's been on my mind for some time. But oddly enough, it starts with one of the things I'm proudest of in the past 8 years, the resurgence of national pride that I called the new patriotism. This national feeling is good, but it won't count for much, and it won't last unless it's grounded in thoughtfulness and knowledge. An informed patriotism is what we want. And are we doing a good enough job teaching our children what America is and what she represents in the long history of the world? Those of us who are over 35 or so years of age grew up in a different America. We were taught very directly what it means to be an American. And we absorbed almost in the air a love of country and an appreciation of its institutions. If you didn't get these things from your family, you got them from the neighborhood, from the father down the street who fought in Korea, or the family who lost someone at Anzio. Or you could get a sense of patriotism from school. And if all else failed, you could get a sense of patriotism from the popular culture. The movies celebrated democratic values and implicitly reinforced the idea that America was special. TV was like that too, through the mid-60s. But now we're about to enter the 90s, and some things have changed. Younger parents aren't sure that an unambivalent appreciation of America is the right thing to teach modern children. And as for those who create the popular culture, well-grounded patriotism is no longer the style. Our spirit is back, but we haven't reinstitutionalized it. We've got to do a better job of getting across that America is freedom. Freedom of speech, freedom of religion, freedom of enterprise, and freedom is special and rare. It's fragile. It needs production. So we've got to teach history based not on what's in fashion, but what's important. Why the Pilgrims came here, who Jimmy Doolittle was, and what those 30 seconds over Tokyo meant. You know, 4 years ago, on the 40th anniversary of D-Day, I read a letter from a young woman writing to her late father, who had fought on Omaha Beach. Her name was Lisa Zanata Hen, and she said, "We will always remember. We will never forget what the boys of Normandy did." Well, let's help her keep her word. If we forget what we did, we won't know who we are. I'm warning of an eradication of the American memory that could result ultimately in an erosion of the American spirit. Let's start with some basics. More attention to American history and a greater emphasis on civic ritual. And let me offer lesson number 1 about America. All great change in America begins at the dinner table. So tomorrow night in the kitchen, I hope the talking begins. And children, if your parents haven't been teaching you what it means to be an American, let them know and nail them on it. That would be a very American thing to do. And that's about all I have to say tonight, except for one thing. The past few days, when I've been at that window upstairs, I've thought a bit of the shining city upon a hill. The phrase comes from John Winthrop, who wrote it to describe the America he imagined. What he imagined was important because he was an early pilgrim, an early freedom man. He journeyed here on what today we'd call a little wooden boat. And like the other pilgrims, he was looking for a home that would be free. I've spoken of the shining city all my political life, but I don't know if I ever quite communicated what I saw when I said it. But in my mind, it was a tall, proud city built on rocks stronger than oceans, windswept, God-blessed, and teeming with people of all kinds living in harmony and peace. A city with free ports that hummed with commerce and creativity. And if there had to be city walls, the walls had doors, and the doors were open to anyone with the will and the heart to get here. That's how I saw it and see it still. And how stands the city on this winter night? More prosperous, more secure, and happier than it was 8 years ago. But more than that, after 200 years, 2 centuries, she still stands strong and true on the granite ridge, and her glow is held steady no matter what storm. And she's still a beacon, still a magnet for all who must have freedom, for all the pilgrims from all the lost places who are hurtling through the darkness toward home. We've done our part, and as I walk off into the city streets, a final word to the men and women of the Reagan Revolution, the men and women across America who for 8 years did the work that brought America back. My friends, we did it. We weren't just marking time. We made a difference. We made the city stronger. We made the city freer. And we left her in good hands. All in all, not bad. Not bad at all. And so, goodbye. God bless you. And God bless the United States of America.
An evocative moment, President Reagan's farewell speech. We have a few minutes remaining before we go back to our regular programming, and we'd like to listen for just a few minutes to people who've known the president particularly well over these 8 years from one perspective or another. At the White House, been there since day one, Sam Donaldson. Sam, that about what you expected from Mr. Reagan tonight?
Well, Peter, we were told that this was a personal speech, and it certainly was. And I imagine the president wrote more of this speech than any other that he's delivered in his presidency, because it was vintage Ronald Reagan. It was small-town America. It was the values that he's preached all his political life. He reaffirmed, as he began in his presidency, his belief in the free enterprise system and the things that when he was a child he thought were important, and he admonished children now to make certain their parents teach them that. I will say this, though. It was a very self-congratulatory speech. The president talked about his accomplishments in very glowing terms. He talked about the deficit once, but he didn't mention a lot of the things that a lot of historians will look at and say, no, that didn't happen just that way, and it didn't turn out just that well.
Thank you, Sam. We'll be back to you. In a moment, we'll talk to George Will in Los Angeles right after this.
ABC News coverage of a presidential farewell continues in a moment.
Over time, they gained a wisdom about the foods they ate. A wisdom handed down in a breakfast enjoyed throughout Europe, known in America as Kellogg's Mueslix. A natural balance of wheat bran fiber, oats, rice, corn, barley, dates, almonds, and figs. Kellogg's Mueslix, bran or 5 grain, what breakfast was meant to be.
They've made Tylenol even better.
Gel caps are concentrated power.
They're solid, and they go down easier than capsules.
Tylenol gel caps are smaller than capsules, with extra-strength pain relief concentrated into a solid center under a smooth gelatin coating, so they're strong and easy to swallow.
Fantastic. Just fantastic.
Gel caps. Tylenol gel caps. It's a tough pain medicine.
Extra-strength Tylenol gel caps. It's not a capsule. It's better.
Welcome back. Joining us from Los Angeles, ABC News commentator, syndicated columnist George Will. George, you wrote this week that history will judge Reagan to be in the front rank of the second rank of American presidents. You don't have a lot of time, but explain what you mean.
Well, I think tonight, Peter, in Ronald Reagan's ending, we heard Ronald Reagan's beginning. Not his beginning in 1981, but his beginning as a young man in the 30s when he, like the rest of his generation, acquired from Franklin Roosevelt his model of what a president does. He is fundamentally a mood-setting, tone-setting, inspiriting, confidence-building figure in our system. What Ronald Reagan does when he speaks of the Reagan Revolution is really talk about the change in American morale. Actually, the government today, Peter, is larger than it was in 1981. It's taken a slightly larger portion of taxes and GNP. That's not the Reagan Revolution. The Reagan Revolution is to make Americans feel good about themselves on the premise, and it's central to Ronald Reagan's life, that when this country feels better, it uses freedom well.
George Will, thanks very much. Now it's a brief comment. ABC News correspondent and sometimes commentator Jeff Greenfield. Jeff, you were one of those people who talked a little earlier about then and now, and the president alluded to all the people 8 years ago who said he was going to be a disaster.
Right. It seems to me that a lot of liberals would gladly help Ronald Reagan with a rather thin list of things left undone, but it occurred to me, if you went back to 1980 and said to an ardent liberal, I'm not going to tell you who's going to be the next president, but after 8 years, you're going to have no cutback in civil liberties, lower unemployment, lower inflation, and the best relationship with the Soviet Union you've ever had, and you'll have a big deficit. Will you take that deal as of 1980? A lot of them would have said yes. Ronald Reagan's most frightening rhetoric to liberals was never enacted into policy. And in fact, this era of good feeling aspect about Reagan, which he reflected tonight with some of those grace notes, was a key part of why he seemed less frightening than other conservatives, I think, to the large body of Americans.
Thanks, Jeff, very much. Final word from Sam Donaldson, who's so identified with the White House at this network. Sam, George Will wrote this week that rhetoric was central to his presidency. Comment on that.
Oh, absolutely. He's used the bully pulpit, Teddy Roosevelt's bully pulpit, better than anyone else, including John Kennedy, in my estimation, to rally public opinion around his causes. He's done it in a variety of ways, but the rhetoric he's used, as you heard tonight, small-town America, simple words. We'll pull the plug, he says, if we have to on the Russians. This is language that people identify with. It's not sophisticated, but it is very much American and very much part of this man's strength.
Sam, a more personal question than we normally ask you. I think President Reagan's going to miss you. Are you going to miss him?
Well, it's not possible to dislike Ronald Reagan, the man. You can dislike his policies, Peter, and the way he has not administered his office often. You can't dislike him. I think any reporter misses the person he covers, but he misses him as a reporter. I'm not a social friend of this president's, but of course I'm a reporter who's covered him, and I wish him well.
Okay, Sam Donaldson, thank you very much. George Will and Jeff Greenfield. Sam talks about that affection the president leaves. George Will, in his long article, worth reading this week in Newsweek magazine, calls it a crest of affection. He certainly leaves this office every bit as popular as when he arrived. The inaugural ceremonies a week from Friday. We hope you'll join us for them later this evening on Nightline.
Shooting down of a Korean airliner. Now, in these past several days, violence has erupted again in Lebanon and Grenada.
United States paratroopers invaded a flag port this morning.
The captain and crew of the political ship Reagan Bush were out in force today, underlining the official start of the re-election campaign.
Well, I feel that the people of this country made it very plain that they approved what we've been doing.
They called it the Reagan Revolution. Well, I'll accept that. But for me, it always seemed more like the great rediscovery. A rediscovery of our values and our common sense.
The Constitution of the United States. Help me God. So help me God. Congratulations, sir. We are creating a nation once again, vibrant, robust, and alive. But there are many mountains yet to climb.
I've spoken recently of the freedom fighters of Nicaragua. They are the moral equal of our founding fathers. I came to Geneva to seek a fresh start in relations between the United States and the Soviet Union, and we have done this. I want the new closeness to continue, and it will, as long as we make it clear that we will continue to act in a certain way as long as they continue to act in a helpful manner. If and when they don't, at first pull your punches. If they persist, pull the plug.
Suddenly, an explosion.
Pilots of the air and naval forces of the United States spoke to the outlaw Libyan regime in the only language that Colonel Gaddafi seems to understand. I feel like we've just played the World Series of tax reform, and the American people won. I was not fully informed on the nature of one of the activities undertaken in connection with this initiative. This action raises serious questions of propriety. We've got to do a better job of getting across that America is freedom. Freedom of speech, freedom of religion, freedom of enterprise, and freedom is special and rare. It's fragile. Yes, they were ordinary men who did extraordinary things. Yes, they were heroes.
I assumed that the president was aware of what I was doing.
All the business indices are up. There is nothing wrong with the economy. The maxim is, dovii no provii.
trust but verify.
The grand jury indicted 4 defendants.
The unemployment rate dropped another 0.1% last month to 5.6%, the lowest in nearly 9 years.
But George, just one personal request. Go out there and win one for the Gipper.
And liftoff. Liftoff. Americans return to space as discovered.
The budget year ended on September 30th with a deficit of $155 billion.
Mr. President, how did your meeting go? Look at his smile. Read our smile. Everything was fine. And we hope it's going to be even better.
My friends, we did it. We weren't just marking time. We made a difference. We made the city stronger. We made the city freer. And we left her in good hands. All in all, not bad. Not bad at all. And so, goodbye. God bless you. And God bless the United States of America.
When we return, we'll assess the Reagan presidency with former Senator and former Reagan Chief of Staff, Howard Baker. With Massachusetts Congressman there in the wake of the Iran-Contra scandal, Senator Baker was asked by the president to replace Donald Regan as White House Chief of Staff.
Tomorrow at 4.
He entered Congress when Ronald Reagan became president. Since then, he has emerged as one of the most eloquent liberal voices in Congress and has frequently opposed the administration on issues ranging from military spending to catastrophic health care. Congressman Frank joins us from our Boston bureau. And with us here in Washington, Sam Donaldson, who has covered the White House for ABC News throughout the entire Reagan and Carter administrations. But Congressman Frank, I want to begin with you so that you as a friendly adversary from across the aisle can analyze for me how is it possible that this president, any president for that matter, makes it through 8 years in this day and age with his popularity ratings just about as high at the end of his term as they were at the beginning of the term. How did he do it?
First, I think the president was becomingly but inaccurately modest today when he said he's no great communicator, it was just the message. He is very good at what he does. He's a political leader, and he's a superb political leader and deserves a good deal of credit for that. He does an important job very well, or has just finished doing it. Secondly, things have gone well that he didn't necessarily have control over. That is, I think he had some skill, he also had some luck. Oil price shocks, for instance, were a terrible problem for Gerald Ford and Jimmy Carter. Ronald Reagan, along with the rest of the world, benefited from them going the other way. But the most important break he got, that all of us got, was the emergence of Gorbachev. We don't want to over-romanticize him. The president correctly pointed out that there are still very fundamental philosophical differences between us, where I think we're right and the Russians are wrong. But Gorbachev is by far the most civilized and sensible leader that Russia has had. And over the past few years, that's given the president a chance, for instance, in the INF Treaty, to make some very real gains that I don't think any president could have gotten if we'd still had someone of the Brezhnev mold.
Senator Baker, Congressman Frank speaks eloquently for himself, but let me sum up in one word what he's just said. It's kind of the same thing as the secret to good comedy, timing. Timing is everything. Was it the timing, or 5 years from now, are we still going to be looking back and viewing the Reagan presidency quite as mistily or through as misty-eyed as we are right now?
I think the Reagan presidency is going to look better in 5 years, Ted. I don't disagree with much, maybe nothing that Barney Frank just said, and timing certainly is vital, and there's no substitute for luck, and the Reagan luck is enormous. But I think there's something far more important to the Reagan presidency than that, certainly more important than luck. And I really believe as significant or more significant than the matters that the president spoke of in his farewell address tonight, I think Ronald Reagan was able to communicate not only verbally with great skill, as Barney Frank says, but I think he communicated in that very special nonverbal way that people understand, especially in this age of television. And they came to know him, to like him, to understand him, to have faith in him, and to give him the support that was necessary to make a difference. And he did make a difference. And having made a difference, I think he'll rank with the really successful presidency presidencies of recent time.
Sam, there is a phrase that we have not yet used on this program, but we can't really talk about the Reagan presidency without referring to that phrase, and that is the Teflon presidency, or the Teflon factor. The fact that even when things went wrong during the past 8 years, someone else always took the rap. It never stuck on Ronald Reagan. Have you, after 8 years of watching him, come to any conclusions as to why that is?
Well, Ted, Ronald Reagan comes across as such a nice guy, in part because he is a nice guy. But we don't want to blame our Ronnie for things that go wrong. I mean, Cap Reinberger may spend us into the poorhouse, and Ed Meese may give away our civil liberties, and early on, George Shultz might give away the sword to the Russians, but not our Ronnie. He had the ability to be the front man. Ronald Reagan was the guy who, like the general contractor, said, I want you to build a house this big. Now, he didn't know how to lay a brick. He didn't know how to bevel an edge. He didn't know whether the carpenters ran off with the money. But he knew when the house was done whether it was right or not. And the American people sort of sensed that. So he didn't get the blame for things that he ought to have gotten the blame for because he was in charge. We blamed Howard Baker or Jim Baker or Donald Regan, but not our Ronnie. It's amazing.
Let me put to you the question that I put to Senator Baker a moment ago. What do you think? Historians is too grand a term. What are the Sam Donaldsons of 5 years from now or 10 years from now, or even folks who are just studying the Reagan presidency in universities 10 years from now, what are they going to be looking back and seeing that we did not highlight sufficiently?
Well, Ted, I think what they're not going to be seeing so much as we have is this marvelous Reagan charm, which we saw tonight again on television. It's the policies and whether they've worked. Has this gamble on Gorbachev 5 or 10 years from now worked out? Is it a safer world? Or did Gorbachev take us for chumps? Has Reaganomics led to new prosperity? Or because we've spent ourselves by mortgaging the future with this almost tripling of the national debt, have we spent ourselves into a new depression? That's what they'll be looking at, not whether Reagan's charm and Reagan's grin captivated us today.
All right, let's focus on a $155 billion deficit when we come back. We'll continue our conversation in just a moment.
I need a taste. Give me just a taste.
If you want to taste something truly sensational, just look for the NutraSweet Swirl.
You start me up, don't ever quit. NutraSweet's the one. Give me just a bit. I want to taste, oh yeah.
NutraSweet, why so many things taste so good.
In a place like this, what you bring with you is critical.
When 1,000 doctors were asked which one of these medicines they'd want along, the clear choice was Bayer.
I chose Bayer. Shouldn't you?
Bayer, the wonder drug that works wonders.
Rich stain and tough polyurethane protection in one. Polyshades by Minwax. Get a beautiful finish in half the time. A finish to be proud of. Polyshades by Minwax.
He was a well-respected doctor, often giving medical treatment for free to those who could not afford it. But the pain and suffering he caused his own family held no bounds. On the next Oprah Winfrey Show, we're going to talk to the family of a man who murdered 2 of his own sons. The motive was to collect the money from the insurance policies he took out on their lives. On the next Oprah Winfrey Show.
Tomorrow at 4.
You know when you're a schlump and you get stains on your favorite shirt?
Oh, I hate that.
Me too. So I really love this new thing called Stain Guard.
It's a breakthrough.
Check this out. Bacon grease on polyester fabric. Can you imagine? But the Stain Guard kept the stain from setting, so it washes right out.
Shall we show them where to get it?
Ta-da! New bounce with Stain Guard.
Isn't it wild?
So now you can fight stains before you get them.
New bounce with Stain Guard. Stains get on, but they don't stay in.
Hello, I'm Wilma Smith.
And I'm Roy Weisinger. Coming up Thursday on Live on 5, former Attorney General Edwin Meese joins us live with his personal perspective on the Reagan years.
It will be gadgets and gizmos galore as Steve Craig shows us the newest offerings on the market.
Thursday is Mothman Movie Meter Day, and 2 brand new movies will be going up against the test. Find out how they fare.
Plus, a first look at all the day's news, the complete weather picture, and live traffic reports.
It's coming your way Thursday at 5.
behind the scenes at Madame Tussauds, the most famous wax museum in the world. Find out how those startling lookalikes are made. Watch 2020 Friday.
Tomorrow, America's emergency rooms. Are they in a state of emergency? Also, a preview of the ACE Awards with host Harry Anderson on Good Morning America.
Let me begin by going back to Senator Howard Baker. Senator Baker, I'm always grateful that old commentaries and analyses of mine are not waved in my face 5 years after the fact. But for a president who came into office railing against the deficit, to have left now and promising to balance the budget and to be leaving now with a $155 billion deficit, how does he get away with that?
Well, I don't know how he gets away with it. I think that history will treat kindly with him because on balance, I think he's had an enormously successful presidency, and I think it's going to look better even as time goes by. And I don't know what I'm about to say firsthand, but I suspect that at some point early on, almost certainly in the first term, that Ronald Reagan took a look at the cards before him on the table and decided, you know, I got to make a judgment here on what I'm going to do. Am I going to raise taxes? And I think he was firmly committed against that and committed instead to reduce them. And I think that was the right decision. Is he going to beef up the military? Is he going to make us a strong, respected military force? And I think that was almost first in his mind, and I think he made that decision. Is he going to have a safety net under the most abject poor in our country? And he tried very hard to do that, and when you put all that together, it produced a deficit. I guess what I'm saying for a Republican is probably heresy, but I think he made a conscious judgment that as much as he would like to balance the budget and to reduce the deficit, that these other things had to be taken account of, and he did them successfully, and I think his decisions were correct. I think it should be noted that the deficit now is coming steadily down. It was over $220 billion 2 years ago, and if we continue with the present downward glide path, I think it will continue to improve very remarkably.
Barney Frank, Jimmy Carter would have been nailed to the wall.
Absolutely. I was struck when Howard said that one of Reagan's advantages was his nonverbal communication. I think after watching him, Howard, we're all going to want to learn how to non-verbalize better than we do. Ronald Reagan had an ability to say one thing, believe another, do a third, and get away with it. And clearly his affirmation of common values bought him a lot, and it allowed him then to deviate. I think with regard to the deficit, Ted, he basically decided, I think Howard Baker was right, that his deficit was a lot less obnoxious than anybody else's deficit. And in fact, of course, it was a different type of deficit. It had much less in the social area, much more in the military area than it would have had in other circumstances. I would disagree with the assessment that Senator Baker gave, I guess not surprisingly, particularly in the military area. There was a degree of overspending there that I think has been wasteful and damaging. I think there was a degree of tax cutting in the early program. The 1981 tax cut was overdone, as David Stockman himself acknowledged, that it got carried away in a kind of a bidding process. So I think there were some very grave errors there, but the charm appeared to transcend them as far as the public perception was concerned. Part of it was, I think, Ronald Reagan's very own detachment, which you might, in the abstract, think of as a defect, became an asset for him. People could believe that he didn't really deserve responsibility for it, maybe in part because in the day-to-day sense he didn't, that he really did delegate so much more than any previous president that he is in some ways less directly accountable, although ultimately he's obviously got to be held accountable.
That's a wonderful point, and Sam, we'll come to you in the last segment because I want to go back to Howard Baker on that point, this detachment. How detached was he really on a day-to-day basis?
Well, not as detached as some say. I met with him every morning at 9 o'clock while I was at the White House, and I met with him constantly in the course of the day. And there are 2 or 3 things that characterized the Reagan presidency that stand out in my mind. He knew exactly who he was. He had no trouble acknowledging that he was president of the United States. And that has not always come easily to other presidents. He knew what he believed. He knew that when he came, and he knew where he wanted to go. He had a very clear understanding of what he wanted his agenda to be, and he was perfectly content to have others around him, by and large strong people around him, carry out those instructions. And he was confident of himself and of his agenda, and it gave him a sense of detachment, but he was very much in control of the presidency, and I think that is manifest in the success that he's had in these 8 years.
We've got to take a break. Sam, when we come back, I'd like to talk a little about how much of the Reagan presidency is actually going to survive the departure of Ronald Reagan. We'll continue in a moment.
Next time you rent a car anywhere in the world, be sure to use Gold MasterCard, and you'll automatically be protected with Master Rental, the best car rental insurance any card offers. Should anything happen, we'll take care of you, pay for it, handle the paperwork. All you do is make one easy phone call anytime. That's simpler and better than American Express. Master Rental, from the world's #1 gold card, Gold MasterCard.
Hi, guys. Left your favorite dinner, Velveeta shells and cheese. It's made with real creamy Velveeta cheese sauce and not a powder, so it tastes creamier.
Velveeta shells and cheese. It's the creamiest macaroni and cheese around.
Thanks, Mom. Anytime, guys. You've got a sore throat.
Hello, would you?
And a cough. Put your throat on nice. Nice cools your throat, showers your pain with medicine pleasantly.
Would you like to buy a trusty little vacuum?
No, thank you. So you can have a nice day.
In a recent survey, Maytag owners told us they're more satisfied with their Maytag dishwasher than they were with the dishwasher they had before. Here is living testimony. Maytag, with its 54 high-velocity jets of water, has unsurpassed cleaning power to take the kind of grease and grime they dish out. At Maytag, we look forward to hearing from our owners.
So would I.
Maytag, the dependability people.
Tom Raper, Richmond, Indiana says all 88 models must go, whatever it takes. Clearance sale, now. Motorhomes, trailers, fifth wheels, tent campers, truck campers, mobile homes, sectionals, truck caps, $99. RV antifreeze, only $2.99. It's absolutely worth the drive. Tom Raper's 60-acre complex with the finest, largest indoor showroom in America. Nobody beats Tom Raper's bottom line deal. Daily till 8, closed Sunday. I-70 exit 149A at School Bus Factory, Richmond, Indiana, where the roses grow.
Back with Sam Donaldson. Sam, I think you know what I'm referring to. Very rarely, even with the strongest of leaders, do their policies survive their departure from the scene. How much of Ronald Reagan, how much of his policy is going to survive his departure?
Well, here's my view, Ted. In foreign affairs, perhaps a great deal. At least I hope so. The new opening with the Soviet Union, the relaxation of tensions. The Soviets have withdrawn around the world under Ronald Reagan, and what he has proclaimed, that is, freedom, is on the march, and I think that may survive. At home, though, I wonder, in the economic area, George Bush has got to try to balance this budget if he can, or at least reduce the deficit. They're going to have to increase taxes, a very focal point of the Reagan administration, I think, is going to have to go by the board in that way. When it comes to government, Mr. Reagan came in saying he wanted to abolish the education department, he wanted to abolish the energy department. Not only have they not been abolished, he's created a third, the Veterans Department. And from political standpoint, Ronald Reagan has not swept Republicans into office. Yes, George Bush won the presidency, but almost everywhere else, the Democrats consolidated gains, increased their strength in the House and the Senate.
Sam, let me interrupt you. Senator Baker, we've got about 35, 40 seconds left. Same question to you. You know both George Bush, you know Ronald Reagan. How much of Ronald Reagan will survive into the Bush administration?
I think Sam's got it about right. I think a lot of the foreign policy part, and I think that's one of the real advantages of the transition from a Republican to a Republican presidency. It's uncertain about the domestic side. Taxes will be a big debate. I don't know how that'll turn out.
It always was a riverboat gamble, wasn't it, Senator? Your phrase.
You should remember.
Gentlemen, I thank you all very much. Congressman Frank, Senator Baker, Sam Donaldson, a pleasure as always. That's our report for tonight. I'm Ted Koppel in Washington. For all of us here at ABC News, good night.
This has been ABC News Nightline. If you wish a printed transcript of this or any Nightline broadcast, please send $3 to Nightline Transcripts, 267 Broadway, New York, New York, 10007. Or call area code 212-227-READ.
This has been a presentation of ABC News, where more Americans get their news than from any other source.
Thursday.
Let's do it.
With this ring, I thee wed.
Dynasty.
I love you more than I can ever say.
Then.
Construction crane collapsed on Randall Elementary School.
There's a pregnant teacher.
Store owner just bopped him on the head with a can of cream corn and called in.
I had him going for a minute with a squirt gun until I pulled the trigger.
The medics say he'll be all right.
Hey, what do you think I'm going to get for this?
Look, I'm busy. I can't talk right now.
Holman, I'm a menace to society.
No roommates with that one.
Larry Harvin? Hank Lovelace. They let you out? Yeah, but I'm going back in. How about you? You going back in, too?
I'm in trouble. I'm in real bad shape. Hey, I want my friend in here with me.
Okay, do it. Keep the cuffs on him.
I hope you won't take this the wrong way. I know you must be in pain and everything, but, from over there, you look like one of those giant panda bears. You know, the kind that they keep sending over from China? I think they're wonderful creatures. If I had to look like an animal, that's the one I'd pick. Feel better.
Okay, let's move him now. Put a cop on every side of him and carry him to the curb.
I ain't testifying.
Let's move.
I ain't testifying. You can't make me. Put me in Quentin. I don't care.
That's it. Case dismissed. I might as well go to court so I can hear the judge say it.
Yeah, now you have it there. So the vehicle be
Well, you won.
Ah, that'll be it, Kevin. What did I win?
You really are an arrogant bastard, aren't you? This isn't over.
Oh, sit down, Mr. Hooperman. I recommend the scampi or the tortellini. They're specials today.
How's the rat sandwich?
Yes, I'd like to shop.
I almost had you. Had you sweating there for a while, didn't I? And I'm going to be on the force 20 more years. You're going to screw up again sometime, and I'm going to be there.
I don't know what this whole crusade is all about. I'm sure it's well-meaning, but I don't know what it has to do with me, although I wish I had someone as dedicated as you on my team.
Are you offering me a job?
No. I'm simply extending a compliment. Unless you're on duty.
You don't realize this, but you've got an enemy. I'm not going to let this go. I'm going to be your shadow. If you so much as spit out your car window or jaywalk, you're going to be the new girl on the cell block.
Then I guess I'll have to put on another lawyer. Mr. Hooperman, I'm a businessman. I try to be good for my community, and I wish I could be left alone. And despite the unpleasant nature of our business situation, I find you immensely likable.
I think you're a bag of jakes. A real pumped-up chump.
I don't like to be insulted, and I don't like to be threatened. Why don't you leave that to people in the threatening business?
You don't scare me. I'm going to take you down. You're going to be my new hobby. What the hell? I don't like golf.
Why don't you face it? What we have here is the old joke of the ant and the elephant. Hooperman, I am worth $160 million. I retain a law firm who bought a building based on my business alone.
I bailed myself out, bought a piece on the street, and took a cab over here.
Where'd you get all the money?
I used the money you give me.
So he and Lovelace made a deal.
They'd have thrown that liquor store heist out anyway. I had a chance to help everybody. Lovelace, you, me. It was pretty smart, huh?
Yeah.
Come on, Larry. Come on. Hey, Hooperman. Going home.
Right now, leasing is smarter than ever because your Cadillac dealer is offering remarkably low monthly payments when you lease a sporty new Eldorado, as well as other selected Cadillacs. Just ask about Smart Lease. Cadillac style.
Cadillac, Cadillac, Cadillac style. Cadillac, Cadillac, Cadillac style.
Weight Watchers has a splendid new goodie, a rich chocolate brownie with real chocolate chips inside and walnuts on top. It's a perfectly delicious sweet for your goodie basket. Enjoy it. Just beware of wolves.
Can one light mayonnaise taste that much better? A nationwide taste test proves the best tasting light is Hellman's Light. Naturally what? It's Hellman's. Hellman's Light Mayonnaise. With half the calories. Bring out the best.
Finally, a perspective on how it really feels to do cocaine. From the inside.
I talk about the home show a lot where I work. It is so important for us to know that the information we receive is accurate so that we can use it in our own personal lives, in our own home.
Home, now an hour, beginning Monday.
This is Joan London. Tomorrow, America's emergency rooms. Are they in a state of emergency? Also, host of the ACE Awards, Harry Anderson. And later in the week, Jane Fonda on Good Morning America.
Sunday, a political pawn, some sleight of hands, and a snafu on Mission Impossible. Then some men are just too tough to kill. Arnold Schwarzenegger stars in Raw Deal. Now stay tuned for China Beach next.
On the American agenda, rural towns losing their only doctors, their local hospital. What will it take to get health care to the heartland? Tomorrow on ABC's World News Tonight with Peter Jennings.
An ABC News brief. Now from Washington, Ted Koppel.
Good evening. We did it. That's how President Reagan assessed his 8 years in office in his farewell address to the nation tonight. The president credited his administration with pulling off an economic miracle, with rebuilding the country's defenses, with reforming U.S.-Soviet relations, and with restoring patriotism and traditional American values. Ronald Reagan has been the most popular president in recent memory, but has he been successful? We'll assess that on Nightline.
Some like it hot, but you can't tell how hot till you try. Some like it hot, so it's time.
This winter, Eastern announces hot prices to hot places. 4-day, 3-night Florida vacations for as little as $279.
Some like it hot.
A serial killer has New York City by the throat. 11 murders in 11 months. Only one cop is crazy enough to stop him. Watch him work.
Listen. What? I'm coming!
Does anybody know this guy?
My name is Lieutenant Nicholas Starkey.
The January Man.
Basically, it's a maniac's job.
Rated R. Starts Friday. Check newspapers for a theater near you.
At 11, the president's farewell speech.
Through the mirror of my mind, time after time, I see reflections of you and me. Reflections of the way life used to be. Reflections of the love you took from me. Oh, as I peer through the window of lost time, looking over my yesterday and all the love I gave all these days. All the love that I've wasted. All the tears that I've tasted. All the pain. Through the hollow of my tears, I see a dream that's lost from the hurt